Hi, I'm Randy Murray, and I'm here with Mr. Frank Bridgers, who was president of ASHRAE in 1970-1971, and this is Leadership Recalled for the Historical Committee. Mr. Bridgers, let's start by talking about your family. Tell me a little bit about your family.
Well, I have a wife and 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. I did quite an engineering job on that family. They're 2 years apart. I've got a red-headed boy and a red-headed girl, a blonde-headed boy and a blonde-headed girl, all 2 years apart. So it worked out very well.
Well, that's great. That's 4 children. They're all doing very well today.
Yes, they're doing fine.
But none of them have really followed you into engineering.
Well, my oldest son, Bill, got an engineering degree, but he is not actually doing engineering work. He works for a company in Princeton, New Jersey. He uses his background, but he doesn't do engineering work.
I see. That's great. Grandchildren?
3 grandchildren, 2 grandsons and a granddaughter.
And none of them live here. You now reside in the Phoenix area.
Right. I live in Carefree, and my 2 grandchildren live in Princeton, New Jersey, and one in Taos, New Mexico.
That's right. Let's talk a little bit about how you got started with ASHRAE and your first experience, and a little bit of the history of your time and involvement in ASHRAE.
I got started as a student member at Purdue University in 1948, and during that time I got interested in going to the society meetings. I went. Several of the student members with me went to the New York winter meeting, and it was an outstanding meeting with about 35 technical papers, and I thought it was an outstanding job that was being done for our industry, and I got very interested in the activities of ASHRAE during that meeting. I also met the man who I later worked for, Mr. Charles Leopold, who was a consulting engineer in Philadelphia.
I see. Let's talk a little bit about Mr. Leopold. You went to work for him right out of college, is that correct?
Right out of Purdue in June of 1948. He was probably the best-known mechanical engineer in the country. He did the House and Senate chambers in the Capitol, and he also did the Pentagon building, and did the first air conditioning for Madison Square Gardens. At that time, people did a lot of heavy smoking at boxing arenas, and there was so much smoke that the people in the nickel seats couldn't see the fight. So he put in an electrostatic air conditioning system that filtered out the smoke and allowed the people to see the fight better.
I see. That's great. How long did you work for Mr. Leopold, and tell me a little bit about some of the things and
Well, I worked for him for 3 years. 2 years were in Philadelphia, and I worked on the air conditioning for Saks Fifth Avenue, among other projects, the Richmond newspapers. And then he got a project in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and he sent me out on this project. It was a laboratory building and an air filtration system. I was there about a year and finished the project, and I was scheduled to go back to Philadelphia, but I really fell in love with New Mexico and the West, and I decided to go to Albuquerque, move to Albuquerque from Los Alamos, and start my own mechanical engineering consulting business. At that time, there were no other mechanical engineering consultants in New Mexico.
Oh, is that right? What, you got a partner about a year later?
No, actually about 4 or 5 months later, I had met Mr. Don Paxton, who was head of the mechanical engineering section at Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory. And I called him and asked him if he would consider coming down and being my partner. And I told him I have 5 projects that I really can't take care of by myself, and I need his help. So he moved his family with 5 children and his wife pregnant to Albuquerque. All 5 of those projects fell through. But fortunately, we were able to get other work with the Atomic Energy Commission, both at Sandia and Los Alamos, and we were able to get work with architects and other people, and things went very well.
That's great. Tell me a little bit about you. The company then, Bridgers and Paxton, expanded and grew, and how did that all happen?
We started out as in my backyard. It was a backyard outfit in my garage, and we only had 3 or 4 people, and we got some other people, and we got up to about 12 people, and we were just bursting at the seams in my garage. So we decided to build an office building, and we decided to make it the world's first solar-heated commercial office building. And that's what we did. And we built that building in 1956. And it got quite a bit of publicity. As a matter of fact, there was a full-page picture of it in Life magazine. And several of the architectural journals showed pictures of it.
What year was that?
1956. And the building was successful and proved to be a very good headquarters for our company. And at that time, we started putting on more employees, and we expanded the solar building several times, and we occupied the building until about 1970, or 78 or 9, and then we moved to a new headquarters.
I see. Was it also solar heated?
No, it wasn't. It was a conventional building, and it is a very nice building.
That's great. You opened up offices in a couple other cities?
Yes, we opened an office. We had offices in Salt Lake City, in Denver, and Phoenix, and we now have one in El Paso. We sold out to the employees in Salt Lake City, and the office in Denver we had to close because during the early 80s the bottom dropped out of the Denver economy, and we had to close that office. But we did a lot of good work up there, and enjoyed it very much. They have a very fine group of professionals and architects that we enjoyed working with. Same thing is true of Salt Lake City. A lot of our work in the Utah area was with the Brigham Young University. We did the mechanical on every building that was built on the campus between about 1958 and 1975, with 1 or 2 exceptions. So we had a great relationship with the university, and we enjoyed the work very much.
Tell me a little bit about, let's jump back into your family a little bit. You've been married for quite a while?
Yeah, about 45 years, and we had 4 children in about the first 6 years. It may not be a record, but it's a good average.
That's a handful. How did you meet your wife?
I met my wife in China, Shanghai, China. We were both in the service. This back in 1945, and we went on an R&R leave, and there were 500 men and 3 women, 2 Red Cross, and my wife, who's a member of the Women's Corps. And I really didn't get to know her very well until we went back on the train back to Shanghai, and got to sit next to her, and so we got acquainted. However, we didn't get married until 3 years later in Santa Fe. We got married in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So she got to love New Mexico and as much as I did, in the western part of the United States.
Oh, well, that's neat. Let's talk a little bit about Strive for Excellence and research. You're president. Why don't you give us a little bit of an outline of the year or the 14 months that you served as president?
All right. Every president has a theme that he tries to develop during his 1 year, and my theme was to strive for excellence. And it's not an original idea. I got it from a book written by Mr. John Gardner. It's an excellent little book, and I thought it would be a good theme for the Engineering Society. And as a part of that theme, I proposed a Presidential Award of Excellence for chapters. At that time, ASHRAE had 125 chapters located throughout the country and Canada. Canada is a part of the ASHRAE group. Mm-hmm. And so no one had done much to encourage improvement of chapter operation. Most of the emphasis was on research and headquarters improvement and staff improvement, this type of thing. And I thought this would be an incentive for the chapters to improve their operation. And we took standard criteria such as attendance, increase in membership, donation to research promotion, simple criteria like that to determine whether a chapter would get the Award of Excellence, which was presented at the annual meeting at the end of my term. And it worked out very well. There were 25 chapters that improved their attendance and their increased their membership, and the overall society growth was about 4% compared to other engineering societies such as the American Society of Mechanical Engineers and Electrical Engineers, Civil Engineers, etc. Due to a slight recession at that time, they all had a decrease in membership. So I think that it was helpful in maintaining the membership. And I was pleased with the acceptance and result of it. And the nice thing about it, it has been accepted by every president of the society who succeeded me, and it's still in operation. The Presidential Award of Excellence is still given every year for 23 years, and some chapters have received the award every year. And one of the chapters being my own chapter, the New Mexico chapter.
Has done well, huh?
Has done well.
That's
so
excellent.
That made me feel good. And there was one other area that needed attention. ASHRAE has had its own research program. Up until 1960, they had their own research laboratory. But they closed the laboratory in 1960, and they decided they would do sponsored research in universities and colleges and in private research facilities. But in order to do that, you have to have money to pay for the research. So we needed to raise the funds, Research Promotion Fund. I established a committee called the Research Promotion Committee. And I got the very best man I could get, which was Mr. Bill Collins from Oklahoma City. And he appointed Mr. Bill Johnson to be in charge of the western regions and Mr. Bill Seeloff to be in charge of the eastern regions. And they went to work, and by the end of the year, they had increased the contributions to research by about $50,000, and they set a goal that in 5 years they wanted to increase it by $500,000 for $500,000 per year. And it took them 6 years to do it, but they achieved the goal. And today it's still going forward. And last year I think they got a contribution of $1,200,000, and then they expect this year for it, and certainly by the time we hit our 100th anniversary in 1994, to be up to $1.5 million. And so it's been another successful venture that I think needed the attention and turned out to work very well, primarily because of the man I selected to be chairman of that committee.
Tell me a little bit about the first the meetings during your term. There was the summer and the winter meetings.
Well, in my term, I was inaugurated in Kansas City, the old Mulebach Hotel. And it was kind of an interesting meeting because I have an identical twin brother, John Bridgers, who has been in athletics most of his life. He coached 10 years as head football coach and athletic director at Baylor University. He also was line coach for the Baltimore Colts when they won the sudden death world championship.
Wow.
And even though through the time we've continued to look almost exactly alike. And many times when I'd go to his game, I'd sit with his wife, and people wanted to say, "Coach, you sure play it cool, sitting up here in the stands with your wife." So we had a lot of fun, and I said, "Now, I've been to a lot of your events. Now, I'd like for you to come to this convention and see me inaugurated as president of this society," which he did. So I had a white coat on. Somebody gave him a white coat. So it became kind of mass confusion. And, people really couldn't tell who was who. So we had a lot of fun out of it.
Oh, that's neat. Then the summer meeting.
Summer meeting was in Washington, D.C., and it was postponed 2 months. Normally our meetings are in June, but they postponed it to coincide with the International Congress of Refrigeration, which only meets about every 10 years and only once about every 30 years in the United States. And so they decided they had postponed our meeting 2 months, which made me serve 14 months instead of the normal 12 months. And like Bill Collins says, you're the only guy I know that took 14 months to do a 12-month job. But the meeting did come off in August in Washington, and it was a good meeting, and I was glad to turn it over to the incoming president, which was Mr. Stan Gilman, who at that time worked in the research department of CARIA.
And he then only served 10 months.
He only had 10 months to do his job.
He got it done.
But he got it done very well.
That's great. What would you consider your greatest personal accomplishments as president of ASHRAE?
Well, I really think they were twofold in establishing the Presidential Award of Excellence for the chapters and having it accepted so well by all the chapters, and the competition they had in competing with each other to get the Award of Excellence. I think that was certainly one of them, and the fact that it has continued since that time. And the second one was to promote, to select Bill Collins to be the chairman of the new research promotion group, and the success that has had over the years and up to today. And so I think those were the two highlights of my presidential term. But there were a lot of other things that I enjoyed. Of course, the president visits most of the regional meetings, and I went to Canada, and I went to, one of the highlights was a regional meeting in Ottawa, Canada. And it was Quebec, Canada. And they don't like to speak anything except French. And I was going to have a greeting to the group, and I got one of the Canadians to write out in phonetic English my French greeting. And I rehearsed it a few times, and so I opened the meeting by giving them that greeting in French. And one of the ladies that were attended from Western Canada came up and said, "You know, since I've been here, that's the only French I understood." I spoke very slowly.
I see. That's good. After serving as president of ASHRAE, we talked a little bit about you giving some other people more time to participate in your firm.
Right.
Why don't you talk about some of the activities that you were involved with after the presidency, and some of the activities that your members of your company were involved with?
Well, at the time I was president, it was the time of, we were in conflict in Vietnam, and it was a very unpopular war. And there was a lot of strife, among young people particularly, and families had disputes, and actually we stayed to be as a pretty close-knit family. But during that time, my one son and one daughter were touring Europe on their own, you know, I didn't have enough money to support that. And so they were, but they were learning, and they had some great experiences. And after my presidential year, our firm had expanded, and we were doing work, started doing work in Utah and Denver and places away from New Mexico. So I spent most of my time traveling. And I didn't, when the annual meetings came around, I wanted some of our other people, our young engineers, to have the opportunity to go to the meetings and get acquainted and get active in the society. So I didn't attend a whole lot of meetings except on special occasions. And some people thought, well, he just, since he was president, he's lost interest. Not true at all. It's simply that I wanted to give our younger people an opportunity to participate and have the same good experiences I had with ASHRAE. And that's the way it's worked out. And we've had Dick Supple, who was vice president of the society, and really possibly could have gone and become president. But at that time, he was president of our company, and it would have been very difficult for him to do it. I think that I showed people on my board that I could do a good job as president, and I had a board of directors, 22 people, and 8 of them became subsequent presidents of ASHRAE. And I think they saw that you didn't really have to go on sabbatical leave and do away with your career in order to accomplish that job, and I believe that's why they stayed in and accomplished it. And they all did a good job. But I was extremely proud of all the people that were on my board, and we had really a good time together. One thing that I did that was unusual at the time, I had rather short board meetings. And before that, they had board meetings that lasted to midnight. I didn't think that you accomplished anything after you were sitting there about 6 hours.
Yeah.
Besides that, I had an incentive to get out on the golf course, and
yeah,
I tried to work it to where that could happen.
That's great. You're a pretty avid golfer, I guess.
I've been all my life an avid golfer, which is one of the main reasons that I'm living in Carefree at this time, because I was interested in golf. When I bought a house in Carefree in 1977, we kept the house as kind of a second home and a vacation home up until 1985, and I moved into it full time. And at that time, I opened an office in Phoenix for our firm. And so I retired in December 1991, but I still go in and do one day a week, and do some consulting with the local office.
Well, that's nice. Your participation in ASHRAE did not begin as president. Why don't we start at, the first time you volunteered? And I believe that was right after you came to work in our industry.
Right. I went to the chapter meetings in Philadelphia, and then when I opened my business in Albuquerque in 1951, we started a new chapter there, and we had a nucleus of people that worked at Los Alamos and Santa Fe and Albuquerque, and we started the chapter, I would say probably in 1955, 54 maybe, and so I served through all the offices there, and I was president of the New Mexico chapter in 1958, 59. And I think that I've had at least 10 employees that have subsequently become president of the New Mexico chapter. And I thought that I should take the lead and show that I thought this was important. And we paid their members, their annual dues, and let them have time off from work to do ASHRAE work. And I think most of them have appreciated it, and it's been good for our company and good for the society.
That's great.
And,
were you involved in any technical committees or other committees did you serve in?
yes, I served on one of the first important committee assignments I got was the Research and Technical Committee. And at the time, Dick Jordan, who was afterwards a presidential member, was chairman of the committee. And I was extremely impressed with the work that the R&T committee was doing in deciding which research projects they would undertake. And it was given extremely careful consideration by a lot of very capable people. And the people on those ASHRAE committees were extremely conscientious and hardworking. And then later I served on a large building design committee and served on a couple of other technical committees. But by that time I began to get active in the chairs of the society and served as director at large and for several years. And I was elected to be a vice president and finally president-elect and then president. But it was an outstanding experience that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I would do it again if I had the opportunity.
That's great. That's great. Tell me a little bit about the people you've encountered along the way, and both in ASHRAE and professionally and personally, and how they've influenced you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say that my first employer, Mr. Charles Leopold, was an outstanding influence in my technical appreciation of business. Mr. Leopold was extremely interested in the society and went to all the meetings. And the procedure is in presenting a technical paper, a man will make his presentation, and then they'll ask for comments from the floor. And there was hardly ever a paper presented that Mr. Leopold didn't have some kind of comment to make about. And usually they were very pertinent. He was a very bright man and very good on his feet and a good speaker. And so he had a great influence on me. And in his leadership in the industry and designing outstanding facilities, I think helped our entire industry to be accepted. And air conditioning became accepted as a necessity. For a long time it was a luxury. And, and certainly Phoenix is a tribute to the air conditioning industry.
That's right.
With the temperatures we have here, who would expect 2 million people to live in this valley when it gets to be 110 degrees? And they do it because of the air conditioning industry.
That's right. That's right. Let's talk briefly about what was going on in the world. You talked a little bit about the war,
Yeah.
but in 1970 and 1971, those were volatile years.
That's
a lot
right.
was happening.
That's right. We were active in Vietnam, and as you recall, it was a very unpopular conflict. And but a little later, about 1974, the oil embargo came into existence, and we no longer imported oil from the Saudi Arabia and those countries, and we had to try to do the best we could with our own production. And it became a real energy shortage, and particularly in petroleum products. And so that there became a great emphasis on alternate energy sources and energy conservation. And I think that that's one of the things that helped our company to get to the forefront. Solar energy has been kind of an up and down thing through the years, but during those years, 1973 through 1980, there was a great increase in interest in solar energy. Well, we'd already designed a building in 1956, and we had maybe a jump start on most people in that field. And so one of the projects that I'm very proud of is the Denver Community College building. It was over 300,000 square feet of area. It's the largest solar heated building, I think, in the world, but I'm not positive of that, but that's based on the information I've received. And it's been a very successful project and one that I'm proud of. So that period, in use of alternate energy sources and energy conservation, and that had a tremendous impact on our profession, and also on ASHRAE. ASHRAE came up with a lot of standards of energy conservation, and a lot of their standards were adopted as part of city codes that made it compulsory to use energy conservation measures. And some of those, or most of those standards and codes are still in effect, and people are using them. And we're now getting back into an area where solar energies and alternate energy sources are going to become more important, and it's been a cycle, different times during the different periods. There's been emphasis and de-emphasis on it, but if it's sound, and then it's going to be used in the future. And those are the things that I've enjoyed, and also appreciated the contributions of ASHRAE in energy conservation and developing standards to encourage it.
That's great. Any other major events in the industry that took place that stands out in your mind over the years?
Well, to me, one of the biggest impact on our own engineering practice has been the development of the computer and the computer software for doing engineering calculations. We bought a IBM 1124 computer in 1968. Nobody knew how to use it, but we thought it'd be good to have it there and give us an incentive to get some software and make it work, and we did. And we had some bright young guys that just out of college, and had learned a lot about it, and so we developed some programs. We joined the APEC, which is an organization known as Automated Procedures for Engineering Consultants, and they specialized in cooperative development of software. And we were charter members of that group, and Mr. Bob Hopper, who was at this time president of Bridgers and Paxton, served as president of APEC back in about 1976. And at that time he was only maybe not even 40 years old. He was a very young man to be president of a National Engineering Society. And he's done very well, and I could say that in his hands our company is just as well off or better off than at any time I was serving as the leader. So I'm proud of him, and I'm proud of the job he's done as
That's great.
president. And he's getting real active in ASHRAE. He was he was selected as a fellow, which is an honor.
Yes.
And this last year, and he's done an outstanding job as president of the New Mexico chapter and getting involved in ASHRAE activities.
Tell me, what would you tell somebody who's just entering the industry? How would you prepare them for today's industry? What would you tell them, and what would you think is important for them to know?
Well, you've got to get an education. You've got to get a college education, and you've got to know the fundamentals of heat transfer, the fundamentals of thermodynamics, and you've got to know how to use the computer. And so that's just exactly what I tell them. There's no shortcuts to becoming a real contributing member of this industry. You got to learn the basic principles, and you got to learn the newest techniques and how to handle a computer and how to use it and be confident with it. And I would also tell them to be active in ASHRAE and go to the annual meetings and listen to the programs and write papers yourself. And because everybody's got to write the first one, and it may not be very good, but the more practice you get, the more your papers are accepted, and the more confidence you have. And so I think that, like I say, if I had it to do over again, I don't know of anything I would change. I would proceed in the manner that I did, and it can be very enjoyable and something that you'll always look back and remember with great fondness. And the friends you make, really, I've made a number of outstanding friends that I've known for 30 years, and we get in touch and play golf together and get together at annual meetings, and it's something that's been extremely a good part of my life.
That's great. Where do you see the industry going, and where do you see ASHRAE going in the future?
Well, I think the industry has a future, and I certainly think ASHRAE has a future. As I say, people demand comfort, and there are industries that can't operate without the technical help of ASHRAE, of cleaning the air and getting good air filtration in buildings, and providing for industrial processes where humidity control is important. And it's not becoming less important, it's becoming more important. And I think that there's certainly it's a good field, and it has a good future. I don't paint a bleak picture at all as far as the future of the industry and the future of ASHRAE as an engineering society.
Any specialty areas that you think are going to grow more than others?
Well, I think that certainly the environmental issues such as cleaning of flue gas and pollution controls and things like that are certainly going to grow and be in the forefront. And the ability to remove harmful substances in the supply air for buildings, and to make sure that people occupy have a healthful environment. And these are going to continue to be important. And it seems like to me the environmental field would be the part that would expand the most, and maintaining. I think energy conservation will still become important, and there'll be different ways that this can be done, and innovative ideas that can be developed by ASHRAE, and I think that that's important. And then let me just say one thing about research and ASHRAE research. Some people will say, why is ASHRAE in the research business? So every company has a research department, and that's true. But their major effort is to develop products and to get a competitive edge on their competition. And ASHRAE's research is for the overall good of the industry. Right. And it's the type of research that companies would not do or could not afford to do. And these research projects go out to universities such as University of New Mexico and Arizona State University and University of Arizona, and they work on these research projects, and they get interested in the society and in the work they're doing, and they become part of the industry. And so it not only helps that we get good results from these institutions that do our research programs, but it develops new people and the interest of new, bright young people to be interested in the business. So I think it's still an extremely important part of the ASHRAE program.
Right. And you've seen that grow, the research, tremendous.
Yes.
Not only your personal involvement and commitment to the project.
Right.
Just tell me a little bit about what you've seen happen in the research area over the years that ASHRAE's been involved in, and the commitment from corporations.
Well, for example, in my winter meeting in 1971 in January, which incidentally was in Philadelphia, and that was the city that I had my first job in the industry with Mr. Charles Leopold. And it was nice to come back to Philadelphia. And I just started this research promotion committee, and there was a vice president of a control manufacturer. He said, I'd like just a spot on the program to make a presentation of a special ASHRAE research, he said, gift or grant. And he said, we want to give this $4,000, which is over and above our normal contribution, because we really believe that ASHRAE research is needed for the overall good of the industry. And he made that contribution, and of course, that delighted me, and it set a good example for a lot of other corporations.
That's right.
And a lot of them followed suit, and that's why we went from $70,000 per year to $1.5 million a year, because of those type of gifts and recognition of the importance of ASHRAE research.
What would you say would be some of the most significant results of ASHRAE research?
Well, I think the research has given the standards of comfort, developed the standards of comfort, the standards of energy conservation, the standards for how much energy is required to do a good air conditioning job, and how the energy can be conserved. I think that and then there's been a lot of research on industrial ventilation and standards for good industrial ventilation that make it safe to work for companies that handle toxic materials. And I have a nephew who's an industrial hygienist for Sandia Corporation, and of course they work with plutonium and nuclear fission, and it's very important to have good standards and to know how to handle those materials and how to make people work in a safe environment with that kind of material. And I think this is all part of ASHRAE research that has made a great contribution to our country and to the world. And incidentally, ASHRAE has a lot of foreign associates. Over the last 10 years, there have been chapters in China, Japan, Russia, Formosa, India, all over the world. And they're using the technology we've developed, our guided data book, the technical information, and they have active chapter meetings. It's really become quite an international society. And one of the things I did since I was president, I was appointed to be part of the International Congress of Solar Energy in Perth, Australia in 1983. And so I made a trip to Perth, Australia with my wife, and it was one of the greatest trips I ever had in my life. I spent a little time in New Zealand, played a little golf in New Zealand and Australia, attended that Congress, and said a few words about ASHRAE and being the representative of the society for this outstanding worldwide conference.
That's great. That's great. Closing remarks. Anything you'd like to say? And have on the record about your experience with ASHRAE, your experience in the industry, and your experience as a professional.
Well, I think that the young people that are coming up in this industry should certainly be members of ASHRAE and be active. And I think they should figure out some way to contribute. Not just work in the industry and make a living by it, but some way to give something back and contribute that will help others come along. And that's the way you get a good engineering society, people who are generous with their time and able to make a contribution. And this is what inspires young people. It's certainly the things that inspired me. Dick Jordan as chairman of the R&T committee, Charles Leopold, my boss in Philadelphia, and other people similar to him gave me an inspiration to make a contribution. And I shouldn't forget my major professor at Purdue University, Frank Hutchinson, who died in the last 2 or 3 years, but an outstanding man. He was a prolific writer in air conditioning, refrigeration, and contributed many outstanding papers, and was, I think, one of the great graduate teachers. He not particularly would have been not a great undergraduate teacher, because he always talked about 1 or 2 levels above you, which made you stretch and study and work hard to achieve. But he was an outstanding graduate school professor, and there are many like him. You know, I just happened to hit him, but there are many just like him that do a great job.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for your involvement, and thank you for all you've done for ASHRAE.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.